Welcome to Quiltripping Travel with Rose, a Big Blend radio podcast featuring award-winning travel writer and photographer Rose Palmer. So everyone, we're excited to have Rose back on her show here because, again, she is connecting through from a cruise ship, right, Rose? So welcome back. How are
Thank
you?
you. I'm good. I am somewhere off the coast of probably Oregon, Washington, Oregon. That's the last sea day of a 22-day Alaskan cruise that left from round trip from San Francisco.
Huh.
So I left at the beginning of June, and I'm returning tomorrow. And this was a very unique itinerary, a very atypical Alaskan itinerary. Most itineraries are usually about a week, sometimes 10 days, and they'll do different ports. So different itineraries will do different ports in Alaska. This one hit pretty much everything that any cruise ship would stop at on an Alaskan cruise over the 22 days. So we did all the possible ports and then all the possible fjords that might be on a Alaskan itinerary. So very unique. I got to see places and got to cruise into fjords and see glaciers that I had not seen before.
That's exciting because now I know you're going to share some tips about your, people doing their first Alaskan cruise and even if it's their second or third. I think we always want advice because it saves us time. It gets us to the experiences we want to have, saves money, right? When you know what you're doing and get some information, that's always a big deal. But sometimes even it's about even taking the time off to go and do something you've dreamed about.
Right.
And so my dream Alaska thing is going to be completely different than others. It's weird. And it's probably not even doable. But anyway, so I'm really glad we're going to talk about tips on this. But really, it does start with, getting out there and knowing what you want, right? Because it's not just the ship. It's about the excursions and what you're seeing. So you're saying you've been seeing like the whole gamut, and you've done it like how many times have you been to Alaska, do you think?
So this is my fourth Alaskan cruise. The very first cruise I ever did, my mother took me. It was one of her first forays into traveling. And we did an Alaskan cruise. And oh God, that was ages ago. And then this is my fourth one. So over the course of many, many years, I don't want to say how many. Yeah, I've done 4 cruises. And then after this cruise, I'm meeting my husband and we're doing a road trip through Alaska and the Yukon. And that's kind of the 4th road trip experience through Alaska that we are doing. Because it's a big state. I don't know if people realize, because usually it's shown on a map separate, right? You've got the 48 states, the lower 48, and then you've got little Alaska and Hawaii in the corner, and it's never to scale. If you were to actually superimpose Alaska on top of the U.S., it would stretch from pretty much Montana down to Texas with the Aleutian Islands. It's huge. It's a huge, 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 huge state, and the majority of it is inaccessible. Alaska doesn't have a lot of roads. I kind of joke around and say it's only got 4 highways, and that's pretty much true, maybe one more, but there's really only a few major paved roads that connect the major metropolitan areas. So it's very easy to get around on a road trip, but really the majority of it is not accessible. And Southeast Alaska in particular, where the cruises go, is quite inaccessible. So you've got a lot of population that lives on the coast and on islands that can't be reached by a road. That can only be reached on the Alaska Marine Highway. Yeah. So there's a very, very extensive ferry system that connects all the coastal communities along the whole coastline of Alaska. So that's one way to travel. That's probably one of the least expensive ways to travel. But for those that like me that like just a little bit more comfort, cruising is really a very efficient and cost-effective way to see the Southeast Alaska and the scenery and the various locales of Southeast Alaska.
I think that's, the thing is it's massive. It is really massive when you think about it. So I'm glad you're doing some tips. I want everyone listening to know, if you go to the episode notes, you'll see some links to all of Rose's coverage of Alaska, from her cruises, her different ones, and then an article really giving you the in-depth tips. So check that out while you're there. So this is, I love this. What would you say is it's so beautiful, it's big, it's daunting in a way, right? Because it's so huge.
Right.
So I know some people may go through a travel advisor even to plan their trip. But what would you say would be the best cruise line according to, don't you have to kind of go according to what you want to experience?
So everybody has different needs and expectations. Older couple or solo person traveling alone may have different needs than a family with young children. All the cruise lines, all the major cruise lines that cruise Alaska have very similar itineraries. So it's really just it's a question of timing, price, and what do you want to see. Now that said, Holland America and Princess have been cruising in Alaska the longest. They've been doing this for a very long time. Holland America since the 80s, and then Princess since the 60s. And as a result, because they've kind of been doing it for so long and have been going into Glacier Bay National Park for such a long time, they kind of been grandfathered into the permits that the national park gives out every year for cruise ships into Glacier Bay. And what is really nice to know is that the park only permits 2 large cruise ships cruising into the bay on any given day during the season. So you're not going to be in there with 10 other ships, trying to jostle and get a view at the scenery. So it's one ship in and out and then another ship in and out. And again, because Holland America and Princess have been doing it for so long, they do end up getting the majority of the permits to go into Glacier Bay. Now, that doesn't say that other cruise lines don't. They just don't have as many itineraries that include Glacier Bay. But there are other fjords with glaciers that you can see. And that was one of the things I really liked about this cruise that I'm doing, finishing now, is that I got to go into some of the fjords and glaciers I had not gone into before. So I've always done a Glacier Bay itinerary. But this time we also went into the bay that has Hubbard Glacier at the end of it, which is one of the largest, if not the largest, glacier in North America. It's a tidewater glacier, and at the water line, it's supposedly 7 miles long. So you just cannot get the scale of it. Even when there's a boat out there, a
Mm.
small boat in front of it, you still can't really get the scale because you have no idea of how far that boat is. Even if it's a small boat that's taking passengers for sightseeing, you can't grasp the scale of this or the size of this glacier, other than it's very big.
It's got to be exciting to
Right.
experience, just to kind of be like, whoa, look at you.
Yeah.
But isn't this all changing too? So some people I know are saying that don't delay on, if Alaska's on your bucket list, don't delay because of climate change and glaciers melting and everything. There's regular calving of the, if I'm saying, I mean, you said fjords. I don't know how to say fjords quite well because I haven't been these places. Yeah, and calving, they
Yes.
calve. So there's the natural side of it, but
Yes.
do you feel like a little bit of an urgency for those who have this on a bucket list to do?
I mean, we don't know what the future will bring. We certainly know global warming is happening. We know it's impacting the glaciers and the rate of ice melt. However, I was reading that Antarctica had some of the most ice deposits this year that it's had in a long time. So who knows? But definitely, we do know that the glaciers in Alaska have been receding in here in the recent past. So certainly, if it's on your bucket list, I think it's good to do anything sooner than later because you just don't know what life will bring you. So go
Oh,
out
that's
there
a
and
good
see
way of
it.
putting it. Yeah. Yeah. Because, I mean, I'm not a scientist, but I don't want it, I want to go because I know that some areas have actually had some issues. So I want to go. I mean, it's on my bucket list. Alaska is definitely a thing that I think people really want to see. Now, if you're going to do, obviously, Glacier Bay National Park is like the most important thing, right? Is your Tombot in the southeast area. But when you choose, I mean, you just said what, 22 days that you've been at sea?
Right, and keep in mind that's four days of that was getting from San Francisco into Alaska. So we'll say 18 days in Alaska, cruising around Alaska. Yeah, it's and we know it, the boat was dipping along really fast. We've been moving slowly, but there's a lot to see out in Alaska. Like I said, it's a big state, and a lot of ports and towns along the coastline have developed themselves for tourism because of all the cruises. So there's quite a few places to stop at and see interesting things and learn about the local native Tlingit culture and see the
Mm.
scenery and the wildlife. There's lots of wildlife.
That's what my thing is, wildlife. And from following you on social media, which I love to do, everyone quilt tripping, you got to do that. You know, it seemed that you saw some whales that you had enjoyed, like on the wildlife perspective, that you got to experience some extra cool whale activity.
Yes, I've done quite a few whale watching tours over the years, and I have countless photos of humpback whale backs and fins and tails, which are pretty. But I've been on the hunt for those, the breaching and the bubble net feeding. And I did a couple of whale watching tours this time, and I finally got to see some bubble net feeding. So what they do, and apparently this is a new phenomenon and behavior for them. We have a naturalist on board, and she's been giving lectures every couple of days about different
Mm.
topics related to the wildlife in Alaska. And so from her lecture, I learned that this bubble net behavior is they've only been seeing it in the last 25 years or so in the humpback whales. And what they do is one of the whales will kind of start going around in a circle and blowing air and making bubbles. And that kind of creates a circular net around the school of fish. And, yeah, I think it's usually a she, starts going in this circle and blowing the bubbles and getting closer and closer to the surface, which then pushes the fish towards the surface in this net of air bubbles, which is why they call it bubble net feeding. And then the pod just has a huge feast on this massive amount of fish. Now, keep in mind that humpback whales don't have teeth, they have baleen. So they kind of they can only eat small fish or krill, and they're huge animals, and they need a lot of food every day. So this is a very efficient way to get a huge amount of fish in kind of one mouthful. So I was very fortunate in that in Icy Point Strait, that area in particular is very rich in nutrients this time of year. So the humpback whales, they have their babies and calves in Hawaii in wintertime, and then in summer they migrate up here to feed and get fat and feed their calves. So because the colder waters, they're very nutrient rich. And so the waters around Icy Point Strait they're calm, and they're very full of the nutrients and the food that the whales need. So it's a good area to see the whales, and they kind of have a local pod that's been hanging around for a while, and we followed them, and sure enough, we were able to see them doing this behavior. And then to cap it off, I came back on the ship after my tour, and I'm just sitting on the balcony kind of enjoying my glass of wine, because it's I have to have a glass of wine in the afternoon, right? You understand
I'm
that?
not complaining.
And I see this pod of whales coming basically in front of the ship that I had seen earlier, with all the little boats following them. And they were bubble net feeding basically, a couple hundred yards away in front of my balcony. So I was able to get some photos that way too with my big telephoto lens. So it was really cool. Like I just, sitting there on my balcony watching this pod of whales go by. And
Wow.
apparently what our naturalist was saying, that the orcas have seen this behavior, and they're now seeing the orcas start to mimic and do some of this kind of behavior as well, because orcas apparently are very, very smart. So just, yeah, really interesting, really, really interesting. So I got to see some very, very interesting wildlife. And then there's seals, and there's a lot of sea
Eagles.
otters, which are, and
Oh,
yeah, bald eagles. I mean, oh my God, I'm at the point where bald eagles are just not a big deal anymore. I'm sorry, but they're just, because they're everywhere. Not
it
just
is
here, but
July.
but
Can you
back
say
home
that?
too.
It is, the Independence Month of our
True.
country. And the bald
I
eagle. I know
know.
Benjamin Franklin wanted a turkey, but anyway, we won't get into that because then
Well,
we
yeah,
might end up in
yeah,
politics. So we won't. But
right.
but I love
No,
turkeys. Listen, I
but
would never put a turkey on a level of a politician. But this when you talk about the actual wildlife, I want to say the orcas, as they're making a comeback, they're really being able to study them. And the orcas they're
right.
playing games with boats and playing. They are incredibly social animals, and it's the same thing with all the whales. They're mammals. They're warm-blooded, and I
Mm-hmm.
think sometimes we forget that these are mammals in the ocean. We forget. We kind of think they're big fish or
Yes.
something, but they're warm-blooded mammals like bears and elephants and
Yes.
dogs and cats.
So more facts that I learned from our onboard naturalist about orcas. Um, They so the female orcas can live to be up to 90 years of age. And just like humans, female orcas go through menopause. And what happens is once the female orcas no longer have young, they become grandmas, they become the matriarchs of the pod. It's the grandmas that lead the pod, and then they're the ones that are teaching the young how to fish. And when the pods are out hunting for fish, each member of that pod, including the young ones, has a job to do, and they're taught by the grandmas. So, power to the grandmas.
I love this. But the whole point too is when you go on these Alaska cruises, when you're at sea, you're looking for wildlife,
Yes.
bird life, and you have naturalists. You have when you're not, doing an excursion off the ship, they're giving you activities or lectures or wine tasting times, and I don't know. It
Yes.
sounds like you guys are not bored on board.
No, no. And we also had when we were docked in Vancouver here the other night, we had a traditional dance troupe, a native, I guess, American local dance troupe come on board and do a performance. And then I also saw that on one of my excursions in Ketchikan. It's called the Saxman Native Village. It's outside of Ketchikan, so it wasn't within walking distance. So I decided that just to, because of the hassle of trying to get there, it was easier to book a shore excursion through the ship for that one. And we went to the Saxman Native Village, and we saw their traditional dance performance in their um, lodge house, their lodge building, traditional lodge building, and then also walked around and had a talk, an explanation of the different totem poles that were displayed in their village and around their area. Yeah, lots of opportunities to learn about the local culture.
I love this. I think because you are always, I think every time you're on a cruise and you've come on a show, you talk about how you're learning history and nature or food. So that goes with the culture.
Yes.
So when you're choosing the cruise line you're going on and you're looking at the amount of time you're going to take, and then you're wanting to look at what is happening in that amount of time that's going to be
Right.
good for you. So how do you balance that all out? It's like maybe you can, I know if you're retired, that's great. You could do whatever you want, but it has to go with income too, right? The actual
Right.
budget.
Exactly. It's right. There's a lot of things people, each person has to take into account when they're planning this. And budget is obviously a big one. Time, if you're working, is a big one. And because Alaska cruises are so popular, the majority of them are 7-day cruises, which fits in well into a typical working person's, working family's vacation time in the summertime. In the shoulder seasons, they might be longer, or like this one that I'm doing, which is sort of a unique type of cruise. But I'll be honest, the majority of the people on this cruise, even though it's in the middle of summer, are older retirees. There's a few kids on board and a few families, but not very many. So
Mm.
it's budget and then itinerary. What do you want to see within that budget? What fits into your time frame, and then what kind of cruise line, what amenities do you want the cruise line to offer you? If you're traveling with young kids, do you want to have all the
Mm.
different slides and activities that some of the cruise lines that are kind of gearing themselves more towards families offer? That said, all the princess ships I've been on do have areas and activities for the kids. They have kids clubs,
Mm.
which from what I've read are the kids love. It just, the princess ships don't have the slides and the climbing walls and ice skating rinks and
Well,
some of those amenities that other ships have.
are you seeing on the Alaskan cruises and some of your
Mhm.
other cruises? Because it seems, because we are living longer as humans.
Mhm.
You seeing grandparents take grandkids and the parents kind of stay and do their job or whatever's going on, maybe be there for a few days or maybe not on a cruise, but Are you seeing grandparents taking grandkids on cruises, basically? That's it, you know.
I've seen a little bit of that. I don't know if, again, if Princess, you get a lot of that on the Princess ships, maybe more on the like the Royal Caribbean or Norwegian or Carnival. But even here on Princess, I've seen some occasions where, definitely grandma and grandpa
Mm.
were on the ship with their grandkids. And Alaska is, is the perfect place for it. So, and in one of the port stops, we had a Disney ship next to us. So obviously there were a lot of families with kids. This was at Icy Point Strait, and a lot of families with kids there just walking along the beach, looking for whatever in the tide pools. And that's where I did one of the whale watching tours, and it was a small group tour, and basically everybody else on board were two families from the Disney ship with young kids, and it was just. Because I've traveled so much and I have seen so many things, sometimes that awe, of seeing something the first time just isn't there anymore. So when you're next to someone, and you see a child and they see the whales for the first time, or they saw the seals for the first time, and just the joy and the amazement that they share and that they express, is just kind of nice to be able to see that, and it brings that awe back for me then.
I agree. I mean, that's the thing. It's like we always talk about there's something cool to go on solo travels. And I think that's another thing about cruise ship is if you're a solo traveler and a woman, obviously you have to be careful. I don't care what you're doing. You can't
Right.
leave your safety up to everybody. You have to be proactive as a traveler, you have to be proactive on your safety, period. I don't care where you are,
Exactly. Right.
but on a cruise ship, it kind of feels like that's a great way to go and experience something. And kind of sometimes it's really nice to travel alone. It is. And you get to
It is.
take things in the way you want to. And I know you have that balance for sure.
Yes.
But
Yep.
on the ship, are you seeing a lot of, maybe single women going off and not single as in, not with a partner, just like they're on their solo travelers?
Yeah, there's quite a few solo travelers on this one. I think because at one point this particular cruise was offering no single supplement, which is why I jumped on it. Because then I didn't
Yeah.
have to pay double. So there are quite a few people traveling solo on the ship, and it's if you're a social person but you're traveling by yourself, it's not hard. Actually, it's very easy on a cruise, I think, to develop a social network because there's so many activities. And even at meals, you can either choose to sit by yourself at a table or you can have a shared table. And then if you're at a shared table, you can have a different shared table every night and meet new people. Or if you found a group that you click with, you can try and sit with them all the time. So I think it's very easy as a solo traveler, and especially as a solo woman, to still be social and, like you said, yet still feel safe and be in a safe environment when you're on a cruise. And then, all the traveling, all the transportation's taken care of for you because the ships and the captain's doing all the driving. So you get into port and, you get off the ship and you go sightseeing, or you do an excursion either through the ship or you book your own excursion. And then when you're done, you're back on the ship and you don't have to worry about, okay, where am I going to go for dinner tonight?
Don't you love about cruising, Rose, that you don't have to keep packing and unpacking? I know you love road tripping like what Nancy and I do year round, but there comes a time of like, okay, do I really have to take everything out of the car again?
Right. Well, and that's going to be our experience, my experience here for the next few weeks, as my husband and I road trip through Yukon and Alaska, and we're in, maybe 3 nights in one place, sometimes one night. But yeah, the nice thing about cruises is that you come in, they bring your bags, you unpack, and then unfortunately at the end of the trip, you have to pack back up again, which I had to do today. And it's amazing how it's a small space, but after 22 days, there's only so many drawers and only so
Mm.
much hanger space and cabinets, but it kind of entropy takes over. And then I have to remember now, how did everything fit back into the suitcase? Because if I don't put it in exactly the same way, I can't close my suitcase.
Yeah, I have to roll everything. And
Right.
actually, we're really bad about we'll hang things up because you can see them, but we do not put things in drawers because that's how you leave them. And I have left things in washing machines across the country. I will
Oh,
say that. And
that
often
happens.
things that I didn't want to leave for other people to see. It's like, yes, yep. So yeah, I could give a whole other set of tips on that, but I won't. I'll behave myself. But this is the thing about cruising. It for those who, are new to this, there's some benefits to this. And like you're saying also, some of the areas, this is the only way you're going to see it,
Yes. So
doing it.
there's places in the world and Southeast Alaska. So I've done it both ways. My husband gets very seasick, which is why he doesn't cruise with me. And our last road trip to Alaska, I really wanted him to see, and he did also wanted to see Glacier Bay. And the only way to do that was, we flew into Juneau, and then from there we took a ferry to Gustavus, and the ferry doesn't go every day. It only goes twice a week. So I had to make sure when was planning the trip that we were there on the correct day to grab the ferry to go to Gustavus, which is the town that's closest to Glacier Bay National Park. And then I had booked us into the lodge at Glacier Bay National Park for 3 nights. And then the park and the rangers, they do a daily boat excursion into Glacier Bay to go see through the fjords to go see the glaciers on a small boat, and also the wildlife. It was good that I booked us for more than one day because we had bad weather one of the days and the boat didn't go out, so we were able to go out the next day. And then when we left, we had to book us on an airplane from Gustavus out to Anchorage. I was surprised to see how big of an airport and how big of it. Actually, the airport itself, the building was tiny, but the runway was huge because it had actually been built during World War II. And then it was a huge jet, an Alaska Air jet that flew us from this, tiny little airport in the middle of nowhere out to Anchorage. Just it was interesting, but it was, we're talking of 5 days to go see Glacier Bay National Park on our own versus being on a cruise ship and for 7 days, and one of those days is, oh yeah, let's cruise through Glacier Bay, and then the other 6 will go see something else. So, yeah, there's the Southeast Alaska with all these places that are only accessible by sea is definitely much easier to see on a cruise ship. And it's also much more budget friendly than doing it on your own with a ferry and an airplane and a hotel room and, the meals
Mm.
that you have to buy on your own and all of that. So
Huh.
now we did have other experiences by booking it on our own. I mean, it was very interesting staying at the lodge there. I really enjoyed it because we got to walk through the rainforest, which was very interesting, and see the local Tlingit lodge house and the totem poles and the talks by the rangers. So, a totally different experience than you would get by being on a ship, but definitely takes longer.
Really become a road trip versus cruise. But I think they both have their
Exactly. Yeah. There's some places that are just easier to see from the water. Panama Canal. Okay, how are you going to go see the Panama Canal unless you're on a ship or a
yeah.
boat of some sort, right? The
And
Norwegian
people
fjord.
said that about Portugal too. Like there's certain parts of Portugal you're not going to get it until you're on a it's like this whole other perspective. Like I like to kayak, not that I'm good
Mm-hmm.
at it, but it's almost like you become one with the birds and nature.
Yeah.
They kind of look at you like, "Oh, you're another floating animal or whatever it is, but you're
Yeah.
big."
Yeah.
And it just gives you this whole other perspective of what you're seeing on land, what you're
Right.
seeing in the
Right.
water. It's just this whole other perspective. And I think as many perspectives as we can get, the more informed
Yep.
we are,
Yep. 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 Exactly. And it's like I said, one area of Alaska that is hard to do any other way. Now, there's mainland Alaska with its roads, which is very easy for road tripping, and there the scenery is just as spectacular because you've got the mountains and the wildlife and the small towns. So it's a really beautiful state.
So Rose, with this last one, I mean, when you think about people going, should I do such a long cruise like what you have just done and are still
Hmm.
doing as we record
Yeah.
this? What would you say? I mean, people may think, oh, I'm going to get antsy or the money. What would you say about doing this kind of long cruise?
It's definitely, you have to be happy having days at sea and being able to occupy your time. But what I enjoyed the most is, sitting in my cabin and just looking out the balcony. And I didn't sit on the balcony all the time because it was actually kind of chilly, but I'd have the door open. And the scenery was just, even when we were going from point A to point B and weren't doing dedicated scenic cruising, there was always scenery to look at. Even if it was out in the horizon, there were just nonstop mountain ranges and they'd be snow covered, and sometimes they'd be totally covered in snow, or just a little bit of snow, but it was just nonstop, and it just went on forever. And it was just amazed me how much of this, how rugged it looked, and I couldn't help thinking that here was land that was just probably not touched by human feet because it just was so rough and so rugged. It was just it was beautiful.
I find this whole the interesting thing with all the snow and the ice, right? And how ice is melting in places and they're finding human remains, like, or artifacts, not just remains, but they both. They are finding it. And we're able to learn more about humans and the evolution of humankind through this whole, I mean, it's sad because it's climate change, or global warming is just the true name of it. There are some like interesting things that are coming out of it. It's a negative situation, but it's like, oh, this is interesting that they're finding it. So the
Yep.
modern times, it's not going to have the footprint, but in ancient times, like millennia, like way, way back,
Mhm.
I bet you
Mhm.
there's going to be things that we start to find out in Alaska, like they have in
Right.
Iceland in certain areas. So I think it's fascinating. To me, I just find the whole thing when nature is in a shift, and I know people go to Hawaii all the time just because of the volcanoes and how it changes shape, like things,
Yeah. Yeah.
you see it change. And so like I know artists are attracted to that. And we do a lot of interviews with artists who go do an artist residency through the National Parks Arts Foundation. They go multiple times if they're accepted to be able to document the change of not just the scenery, but the change of how people are living. It's fascinating. And I think that's the same attraction with Alaska, is that no day will be the same with how
No.
their landscape is
Right.
constantly shifting.
Which is why I keep coming back. And, I've been into Glacier Bay National Park 4 times now. And it's always been different every single time. Usually it's overcast and cloudy because this area of Southeast Alaska is the biggest intact rainforest. But one time I did kind of catch it with some sunshine, and it always looks different depending on the lighting, depending on the time of day, depending on the time of year. And it's always beautiful. And same for the other fjords that I got to see this time. So for the first time, I went into College Fjord, which in some ways I actually liked better because it's shorter, it's smaller, but it's narrower and very deep, and it has 5 tidewater glaciers. And because it's narrower,
Wow.
you're closer to the glaciers. Unfortunately, it was a very overcast and foggy day, so by the time we got to the end of it, and we were trying to see the glacier at the very end of the fjord, it was almost fully covered in fog. But that kind of gives it, a different look and perspective as well. Is honestly probably seeing it in the way it's most people would normally experience it versus a clear blue sky day, which is rather unusual in that part of Alaska. But
Hmm.
yeah, and then cruised Prince William Sound to Columbia Glacier. Didn't get a chance to do that when I was in Valdez last time, so I took advantage of it this time. And again, just gorgeous scenery along the way, and wildlife. We saw sea lions, more whales, otters, eagles,
I
and
really, I adore the otters.
oh, they're adorable. They're just you just want to pick them up and cuddle them, but they're like 5 feet long, so maybe they're rather big, but they are just so cute.
And they do bite.
I'm sure they do. Yeah,
We forget
that
that.
would
They
bite
just
me
look,
too.
they are like a
Yeah,
teddy bear kind of, you kind of look at them and go, "Ooh, I want that," but yeah, let's get real. They're wildlife, and
right.
may not want you to hug them, but
No,
yeah, I
no,
know, but it
no.
is like that, right? They are
Yeah, they just
so cute. They are
yes,
so, so cute. And I think that about seals and sea lions too.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
except for when you get to the elephant nose, they could hurt you, but I know you're a nature lover like we are in wildlife. It's a really huge part of it. And I wanted to talk about, so I know some people you book online with cruises directly. You've
hmm
been around the block in regards to travel. So,
right,
but for
right.
people who have not done it and maybe their first thing, there's travel advisors, travel agents that
Yeah,
are, and travel agents, they're not take majority are not taking extra fees from you. They get commissions
no,
on the other side. So it's like it's
exactly.
a free service for the
Yes,
traveler.
yes,
And something that really, I have so many friends who are travel advisors, and when things go wrong, you at least have someone to call when your flight gets wonky, and it's a good first step. And a
yes.
cruise is something that could lead to you keep going back and forth like you have. But I wanted to ask because you're doing this whole big loop. You just did this big loop, right?
Right,
But
right.
sometimes people are doing a one-way cruise and then flying.
Yes, right. So there's kind of two basic itineraries for Alaska that most cruise lines have. There's round trip itineraries that will leave from normally from Seattle or Vancouver, or like the one I'm doing occasionally from LA or San Francisco. But in general, the round trip ones, the 7-day trips are from Seattle or Vancouver. And then there's the one-way itineraries, which will normally leave from Vancouver and then end at one of the ports near Anchorage, either Seward or Whittier. And then, or it could go the other way around, obviously, from Anchorage down to Vancouver. And then you have the opportunity, if you're doing one way, if you're ending up in Anchorage, you could then do some sightseeing of the rest of Alaska as well, and certainly travel advisors could help you with that. The Alaska Railroad has done a great job of putting together train itineraries that take you from Seward, which is one of the docks, one of the ports that ships stop at, into Anchorage, or from Anchorage to Denali, or from Denali to Fairbanks. And those are very scenic train routes. Or you could do cruise tours. So the cruise lines have combination cruises and then a land tour before or after. They do all the planning, they'll do all the work, they do all the logistics and the hauling your luggage from point A to point B and every day from one place to another. And so that kind of takes all the hassle and the pain from trying to figure out where to go for somebody that's never done this before. So there's a lot of options, but definitely travel advisors can help. And then, like I said, the cruise lines also have their own cruise tours, and they're kind of their own in-house travel advisors that can help plan as well.
Yeah, I think so. And it's worth it. I mean, this is one of those epic things. And when we look at, we're looking at July again, our 250 years of America being here. And we look at Alaska, it was the last frontier for America. And, we think about what we have in beauty in this country. And Alaska is definitely a gem when you look at the country, right? Wouldn't you say this is, and what's so interesting too is the Pacific coast. You can go from Alaska to Hawaii. Like that's insane that we have that in one country.
Yeah. So, and that whole coast is gorgeous, I mean, Hawaii is gorgeous, California, Oregon, Washington
Hmm.
coastline, it's all gorgeous. And then you go continue up past Canada and up and into Alaska, and it's gorgeous. But I think to really appreciate Alaska's beauty, even on a cruise, when you're in town, you kind of have to make an effort to get away and get out of town and get away from the tourist shops and some of the kind of touristy attractions, and go off and do an excursion to either go hiking or see the wildlife or go fishing, or just kind of get away from the crowds and and all the kind of the shopping that's been set up in the
Can
towns
you
to
set up
really experience it.
Can you set up your own excursion? Like if
Oh
you
yeah,
know
of
you're
course.
gonna get into
Hmm.
port and maybe you have a long lost relative or a friend in Alaska that actually knows the backwoods really well. And the woods are big woods there, not just little
Right.
woods. These
Yes.
are big woods. And they're like, "Hey, no, come. I'm gonna give you a tour. You could They could pick you up once you land or
Yeah.
whatever, dock, you're not landing, you're docking, and pick you up and like you could go hang out with them for the day with whatever you want to do. You
Right.
just need to
Yep.
be back on time, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I do a combination of both. I'll look at the excursions the ship offers, and if it's something that is just I couldn't do on my own easily, or it's just much more convenient booking it through the cruise line, I'll do that. But more often than not, I go off on my own, either to just explore on my own, or I'll book my own shore excursion. There are websites like Viator and Get Your Guide, which are basically
Yeah.
clearinghouses for all the tour companies, and you can book your own excursion. And sometimes they are less expensive booking it on your own. Or, I've rented a car and just driven up by myself. So in Skagway, the first time I was in Skagway, we had a very long day in town. And I rented a car and drove the scenic route from Skagway into Canada up to Carcross. Spent a little time in this tiny little village of Carcross, and they happened to be on the weekend when they were doing a Tlingit potlatch get together. So all these local native, tribe people were getting together and basically having a big party and dancing and celebrating. So I caught a
Ooh.
little bit of that just serendipitously, and then drove back and got to stop and see the scenery at my own pace and take pictures and enjoy it on my own. And
That's
then I did the
nice.
same, yeah. And then I did the same thing this time in Haines, Alaska. I didn't really pre-book a lot of excursions ahead of time on this trip because I didn't know what the weather was going to be. So I didn't want to pre-book some, like a whale watching and have it be pouring
Yeah.
rain. So I would kind of decide a day or two before once I knew what the weather was going to be. And so we docked in Haines. I looked at the window. It was a beautiful sunny day, which is very unusual, right? And I knew there was an Avis rental car not far from the dock, so I called them and said, "You still have a car available?" And they said, "Yeah, we have one left." I said, "Okay, I'll take it." And again, we had a long day in town, and walked the 15 minutes to the rental car, which was in the hotel, one of the hotels in town, and picked up my little Camry and drove the Haines Highway, and it was spectacular, just absolutely some of the most gorgeous scenery that I have seen in Alaska. And then on the way back, came upon a bear. He just showed up out of nowhere. For 1 minute there was nothing there, and the next minute I see this big brown wavy butt in front of me on the side of the road. So he must have just come up from the bushes along the edge
You're
of the
like, that's
road.
a hairy dude. And then suddenly realize it's a bear.
Yeah, and he's just walking along the side of the road for a bit. So then there's nobody else on the road. So I pull into the left-hand lane and kind of parallel him as he's just walking, and got a few photos through the window. And then when he went into the bushes, I pulled up along the side and parked and got out of the car, but stayed next to the car and had the door open
Mm.
because we're talking a grizzly bear, right? But he couldn't have cared less, and I'm assuming it was a he or she, but who just busy foraging and walking and going through the shrub and just trying to eat. And
So
so I
cool.
got to, he was maybe, I don't know, 50 yards away. So just got to watch him and then drove back to town and saw some more of this gorgeous scenery. There was hardly anybody on the road. Ran into a couple of other cars of people from the ship who had done the same thing, couple of families. But other than that, the road was empty, and so I got to see all this gorgeous scenery as I drove from the riverbed. We followed the riverbed for a bit, and then climbed up past tree line and to the snow covered mountains, and it was just absolutely gorgeous.
So, Rose, what I love about this is you're showing that cruising can still give you this freedom. You can still go hiking, get into the wilderness, and actually pretty much have a easier way to get to Alaska. Everybody's
Yes,
different. So some
yes.
people may just want to do a 100% road trip, but I think you're going to see whales better from the ship maybe at times too.
Well, possibly. You're really better off doing a dedicated whale watching tour because
Mm,
they're gonna go into where the waters where the fish are and where the whales are actually feeding. But I know, I don't have the patience to be out on the balcony with my binoculars the whole time I'm here, but I know people do see them, the whale spouts from the ship. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that there are also smaller cruise lines, and for people who do like a little bit more adventure, cruise lines like Uncruise, for example,
mm, yeah.
specializes in small ship cruising and with more of an adventurous emphasis. So they have hiking as part of their itinerary and kayaking and polar plunges. So they do a more adventurous outdoorsy type of emphasis on their cruises in Alaska for those that want more of that and want it built into their itinerary versus having to figure out how to do it on their own when
Mm.
they're in a port. But
Well,
yeah, I mean, when you're in a port with the excursions, you can do as much or as little as you want. Some people like the comfort and security of knowing that if they're on a ship organized excursion, if something happens, they're not going to miss the ship will wait for them. And that is one drawback to if you go off on your own. If I was driving and I had a flat tire and in the middle of nowhere, I'm kind of screwed, and it's up to me to get back to the ship. And if I can't, the ship will leave without me, and then I've got to figure out how to meet it at the next port. But if you're on a ship's excursion, then that isn't as much of a concern. But the reality is that if you book an excursion with an outside vendor and you're on a cruise, they know that, and it's in their best interest to make sure that they get you back on time, because certainly nobody wants a review saying that, hey, I missed the boat. And when I've gone off on my own and I plan out my day. I leave a long enough buffer that if something were to happen, I have the time to deal with it. So I don't
Mm.
normally leave it to the last minute to get back on the ship, usually.
That's how we are with driving. Now we used to leave 2 hours on getting from A to B, like extra 2 hours. And and even like if it's cross country drive or whatever, you just balance it out. And what I'm getting to now, it's like when you really go, if you're planning a 10-hour drive, put 16 to 20.
Oh, yeah, I can't sit in the car that long anymore.
Well, it's about
Yeah.
construction. Yeah. But so whenever you come on the show and start talking about cruising, and I go through what I go through on the road, when I love to drive, so I really do enjoy every second of it. Well, not every second of it when stuff's not going right, no one does. But there's that there is an appeal to not having to deal with it and actually experiencing 100% when you're there. And recently, we were just at a conference and a tourism thing and took bus tours and everything. And suddenly I was like, I am not in control of anything. And you're just telling me where to go and I get to experience.
Mhm.
And I was thinking about all the interviews of cruises and everything. And I'm going, yeah, I get this. I get this. Where everybody else you're like, all right, you just tell me what time to be back on the bus. But there was a lot of activities and things, and it was wonderful. And it was really nice to not have to be. And I think with the way the world is so frantic, almost is a word I want to use about
Mhm.
how things are. I'm so busy. And then people are working at home and at work. And you know what? I actually think we all, as human beings, need to kind of detox and actually have that kind of travel experience. And you can enjoy as much or as little. You can sit in your room and rest and just have this amazing view as you're
Yep.
floating
Yep.
through Alaska.
And
That's
just
amazing.
and just read or
Yeah.
sew or
Quilt. Yeah,
knit
I was going to say,
or qu
I was going to ask you at the beginning, okay, when you're
yeah.
booking a cruise, is the requirement there, can I bring my sewing machine? Like,
Hence, so I did bring it on this one because there were so many sea days and because, I was flying domestically, so it's a little easier to haul my bag with my machine in it. With, this much time at sea and downtime, yeah, I've really been enjoying sitting here with my little machine and working on an Alaskan themed quilt and looking out the window and seeing the Alaskan scenery. It's been really relaxing and very enjoyable. And
yeah,
when I'm hungry, I just go up and go pick up something to eat or
pizza.
get a drink or yep, a lot pizza. I've been eating a lot of pizza. And then, if I want a social interaction, I can easily have that. Go take in a show, go listen to some music, and have a
Nice.
cocktail if I want to, or not.
Okay.
And it's been so. The other thing to keep in mind, excuse me, this time of year in Alaska is that we cruise during solstice, so we cruise during the longest day of the year. And Alaska being as far north as it was, we had the sun wasn't setting until after 10 o'clock at night, and it would still be sort of dusky for another couple of hours, and then it might get dark. And then, at one point, I remember getting up at 2 in the morning. I think we had just left Juneau, and I saw the sun was starting to rise. I saw kind of a pink tinge on the horizon. So it's daylight, very long time. So there's a lot of time to just sit and enjoy the scenery.
That's beautiful. Everyone, the links again to Rose's different articles, the tips on cruising, and then just some of the experiences she's had, which is numerous. That is all linked in the episode notes, so check that out. And you can go to quiltripping.com and go there directly and see that there. But thank you so much, Rose. I'm incredibly jealous, and now I think I will go have a cocktail and pretend I'm on a cruise ship.
There
And
you
I do want
go.
to tell you right now, I have a giant Great Dane next to me
Aw,
through this
aw.
podcast conversation. And as soon as you said pizza, I kid you not, his tail started wagging. And when he wags his tail while he's lying down, you just hear this big thump, thump, thump. He is Thumper. But as soon as you
Smart
said
dog.
pizza and I said something about pizza, he started wagging his tail. How wild is that? He's definitely family. Well, thank you so much and happy
Well, thank
sailing.
you.
And we can't
Thank
wait for
you.
next month to catch up on how your road trip was.
Yes,
That's going to
we'll
be
be going into the Yukon. I've not been in, so we're going to be doing the Alcan Highway part of it, kind of a big loop from Anchorage into Canada, and then looping up into Dawson City, and then back towards Anchorage. So for 3 weeks, and my husband, has his fly fishing gear, so we'll be trying to find some lakes along the way where he can try and practice fishing and maybe even doing some catching. We'll see.
Wow.
But
Wow.
it'll be it's my first time other than my foray that I did from Skagway up to Carcross. It'll be our first time into the Yukon, so it should be very pretty. So
Doesn't
it's
even
the
just,
other side of the mountains.
it just
What?
feels good to say we're going into the Yukon, you know? It does.
Yeah,
It's got
yeah.
that wild kind of vibe, like we're going into, like you've been in Africa, like we're going to the Bosveld, and you never know what could happen when we get out
Right.
there, you know?
Yep.
So, well, you stay safe, and
Thank
we
you.
cannot wait to catch up with you next month and hear about your adventures, and I'm sure they're going to be awesome, and then you'll just make us jealous again, to get us off our butts and out to sea. All
Ah,
right. Thanks so much, Rose.
talk to you later.
Thank you for joining us for Quiltripping Travel with Rose, a Big Blend radio podcast featuring award-winning travel writer and photographer Rose Palmer. Join us for new episodes every second Thursday, and keep up with Rose at quiltripping.com and follow us at bigblendradio.com.